When Dr. Elena Vasquez wakes up trapped with an alien assassin, sharing one bed becomes a matter of survival. But falling for him could start an intergalactic war. Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the cool glass of the observation deck, watching the stars drift by like tiny diamonds scattered across black velvet. 3 years into her deep space mission aboard the research vessel Aurora's Edge, she still found the view breathtaking. Her coffee had gone cold again, but she didn't mind. Out here, surrounded by the endless beauty of space, time seemed to move differently. The ship hummed quietly around her, carrying a crew of 37 scientists and researchers toward the Outer Rim territories. Their mission was simple: study alien life forms and bring back data that could help humanity understand their place in the universe. Elena specialized in xenobiology, the study of alien life, and she loved every moment of it. She turned back to her workstation where dozens of sample containers lined the shelves. Each one held something incredible: alien bacteria from distant moons, crystalline structures that seemed to grow on their own, and microscopic organisms that defied everything she thought she knew about life. Her latest discovery had everyone excited: a type of algae that could survive in the vacuum of space and actually seemed to thrive in extreme cold. The ship's intercom crackled to life. "All personnel to stations. We're approaching the research coordinates." Elena smiled and gathered her equipment. Another day of discovery awaited. She had no idea that in just a few hours, everything would change forever. The first sign of trouble came during lunch. Elena was sharing a meal with her research partner, Dr. James Chen, when the ship's lights flickered. Then came a sound she'd never heard before, a deep, resonating vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "What was that?" James asked, looking up from his food tray. Before Elena could answer, the ship lurched violently to one side. Plates and equipment went flying as both scientists grabbed onto the table to keep from falling. "All hands, battle." "Stations!" The captain's voice boomed through the intercom, tight with urgency. "We are under attack. This is not a drill." Elena's heart pounded as emergency lights bathed everything in red. She'd trained for this scenario, but she never thought it would actually happen. Pirates and hostile alien encounters were supposed to be rare this far out in space. Another explosion rocked the ship, this one much closer. Through the dining hall's windows, Elena could see flashes of light, weapons fire. Something fast and dark streaked past, too quick for her to make out clearly. "The medical bay," Elena said, grabbing James's arm. "We need to secure the biological samples. If those containers break..." They ran through corridors filled with panicked crew members heading to their emergency stations. The ship shuddered and groaned around them as whatever was attacking continued its assault. Elena's mind raced through the protocols she'd memorized, but hoped never to use. When they reached the medical bay, Elena's worst fears were confirmed. Several sample containers had already shattered, their contents spreading across the floor. But that wasn't the biggest problem. Standing in the middle of the chaos was a figure unlike anything she'd ever seen. He was tall, maybe 6.5 feet, with pale skin that had an almost silver tint to it. His dark hair fell across sharp features that were clearly not entirely human. He moved with fluid grace despite the blood seeping through his torn clothing and his eyes. His eyes were the most startling shade of pale blue she'd ever seen. "Stay back," he said, his voice carrying an accent she couldn't place. He held some kind of weapon, though it didn't look like any gun Elena recognized. James stepped protectively in front of Elena, but she could see his hands shaking. "Who are you? What do you want?" The stranger's gaze swept over them, calculating. "I'm not here for you. I need the research data, the files on Project Harmony." Elena's blood went cold. Project Harmony was classified at the highest levels. She knew about it only because some of her xenobiological research had been requested for the project months ago. She'd assumed it was for peaceful purposes, perhaps developing better communication with alien species. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied. Those pale blue eyes focused on her with laser intensity. "Dr. Elena Vasquez, xenobiology specialist. Your tissue analysis reports were used to identify genetic markers in several alien species. Where are the files?" Before Elena could respond, Another massive explosion shook the ship. This time, the lights went out completely, leaving only the red glow of emergency power. In the darkness, she heard James cry out, then the sound of him hitting the floor. When the emergency lights flickered back on, the stranger was slumped against the wall, his weapons scattered across the floor. Blood pooled beneath him, and Elena realized he'd been injured in the blast. James was unconscious but breathing, thrown clear by the explosion. Elena should have run. She should have grabbed James and gotten as far away as possible. Instead, she found herself moving toward the injured intruder. Something about his situation struck her as wrong. If he was here to attack them, why was he asking about research files instead of trying to hurt people? "Help me," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the ship's groaning metal. Elena knelt beside him, her medical training taking over despite her fear. His pulse was rapid and weak, and she could see that his body temperature was dropping, fast. Whatever species he was, he didn't handle cold well. The ship lurched again, and Elena heard the terrible sound of metal tearing. Through the medical bay's small window, she could see debris floating past, pieces of the ship's outer hull. They were losing atmosphere, and the life support systems were failing. Warning klaxons began blaring. "All personnel, prepare for emergency containment protocol. Sections 7 through 12 are compromised." Elena realized with growing horror that they were in Section 9. The ship's computer was about to seal off their area to prevent further atmosphere loss. They would be trapped in the medical bay, with limited life support and no way out until rescue came. If rescue came. She looked at the injured stranger, then at James, still unconscious on the floor. The medical bay's biobed was designed to regulate temperature and provide life support for one person in emergency situations. The stranger was clearly suffering from hypothermia, and without treatment, he would die within hours. The moral choice should have been simple. Save James. Let the intruder face the consequences of his actions. But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. Why would someone risk their life breaking onto a research vessel just for data files? And why did he know so much about her work? The containment doors began sliding shut with a mechanical whine. Elena had seconds to decide. She grabbed James under the arms and dragged him toward the biobed. But as she did, she caught sight of the stranger's face. Even unconscious, he looked young, maybe not much older than herself. There was something vulnerable about him that didn't match the image of a dangerous attacker. The doors sealed with a final decisive clang. Elena was trapped in the medical bay with an unconscious colleague and a mysterious injured stranger who might be an enemy or might be something else entirely. The biobed hummed to life, its warming systems activating automatically, but it was designed for one person, not three. As the ship's life support systems struggled to maintain atmosphere in their sealed section, Elena realized she was about to learn more about survival, trust, and the gray areas between right and wrong than any textbook had ever taught her. The stranger stirred slightly, mumbling something in a language she didn't recognize, and Elena wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life, or perhaps the most important decision she'd ever face. Outside their sealed chamber, the battle continued to rage, but inside a different kind of struggle was about to begin. 3 days had passed since the attack, and Elena was starting to lose hope. The ship drifted silent and cold through space, its emergency power barely keeping their small section alive. James had woken up on the second day with a bad headache but was otherwise fine. He'd been moved to a makeshift bed on the floor, wrapped in every blanket Elena could find. The real problem was their unexpected guest. Kyle, that's what he'd told them his name was, couldn't seem to get warm. Even with the biobed's heating system running at full power, his body temperature kept dropping. Elena had never seen anything like it. His skin felt ice cold to the touch, and he shivered constantly, even when unconscious. His metabolism is different, Elena explained to James as they watched Kale sleep fitfully on the biobed. Whatever species he is, they must come from a much warmer planet. His body can't regulate heat the way ours can. James frowned, still suspicious of their uninvited companion. Maybe we should let nature take its course. He did attack our ship. Elena had been thinking the same thing for 3 days, but something held her back. During his few conscious moments, Kale hadn't acted like a typical attacker. He seemed more desperate than dangerous, and he kept asking about Project Harmony with an urgency that suggested something bigger was at stake. On the third night, everything changed. Elena woke to the sound of alarms. The biobed's display was flashing red warnings, and Cale was convulsing, his body fighting a losing battle against hypothermia. Without thinking, Elena rushed to the control panel and cranked the heating system to maximum. "What's happening?" James asked, rubbing his eyes. "He's dying," Elena said simply. "His body temperature has dropped too low. The heating system isn't enough." She looked at the biobed designed for one person, then at Cale's pale, shaking form. There was only one way to warm someone up fast when technology wasn't working: shared body heat. It was basic survival medicine, something any doctor would recommend in a life-or-death situation. "You can't be serious," James said, reading her expression. Elena was already climbing onto the narrow biobed. "It's just medical treatment. He'll die if we don't do something." At first she tried to maintain distance, just close enough for her, body heat to help warm him. But Cale's shivering was violent, and she realized half measures wouldn't work. She pressed closer, wrapping her arms around his cold form and pulling the thermal blankets over both of them. The effect was immediate. Cale's shivering began to slow, and his breathing became more regular. But Elena noticed something else. Wherever her skin touched his body seemed to absorb heat faster than should have been possible. It was like his cells were designed to draw warmth from contact with others. Hours passed. James eventually fell back asleep on his makeshift bed, but Elena stayed awake, monitoring Cale's condition. As his body temperature stabilized, he began to stir, and she found herself staring into those unusual pale blue eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice hoarse but stronger than before. Elena should have moved away. The immediate crisis had passed. Instead, she found herself studying his face in the dim light of the biobed's displays. Up close, she could see that while he looked mostly human, there were subtle differences. His bone structure was more refined, his features sharper, and his eyes, they weren't just pale blue. They had flecks of silver that seemed to catch light in impossible ways. "Why are you really here?" she asked quietly. Cale was silent for so long that Elena thought he'd fallen back asleep. Then he spoke, his words barely audible. "Project Harmony isn't what you think it is." Elena's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "Your research, the genetic analysis you did on those alien tissue samples. They're using it to build a weapon." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. "That's impossible. Project Harmony is about communication, about building bridges between species." Cale's laugh was bitter. "Is that what they told you?" "Elena, your genetic markers are being used to create a targeted virus, something that will attack specific alien DNA sequences. They're planning to wipe out entire species." Elena pulled back, staring at him. "You're lying. My government wouldn't do that. We're explorers, not conquerors." "Then why is your research ship carrying military-grade weapons? Why are there soldiers disguised as crew members? Why was Dr. Chen's real specialty biochemical warfare before he joined your team?" Elena's mind reeled. She looked over at James, sleeping peacefully on the floor. "That's not true. James is a xenobiologist like me. Check his personal files. Look at his education records. James Chen graduated from the Military Sciences Academy, specialized in bioweapons development. He's been watching you, making sure your research stays on track for their real purposes." Elena felt sick. Could it be true? She thought about all the tissue samples she'd analyzed, all the genetic sequences she'd mapped. If someone wanted to create a species-specific weapon, her work would be exactly what they'd need. "Why should I believe you?" she asked. Cale met her eyes steadily. "Because I'm not here to attack anyone. I'm here to stop a genocide. My people, the Zephyrians, we found out about Project Harmony 3 months ago. There's a peaceful colony of mixed families, human and Zephyrian couples with children, living on a research station near the border. They're the first target." Elena's breath caught. "Mixed families? Like me," Kyle said quietly. "My mother was human. My father was Zephyrian. I exist because two different species found a way to love each other despite their differences. But your government sees people like me as abominations to be eliminated. The biobed's heating system kicked in again, and Elena realized she was still pressed against Kale's side. His body temperature had stabilized, but she hadn't moved away. There was something about his story that rang true. Something about the pain in his voice when he spoke of his parents. The colony, she said. Where is it? The coordinates are in your Project Harmony files, hidden in the research data you've been collecting. Every genetic sample you've analyzed has helped them narrow down the location. Elena closed her eyes, remembering all the tissue samples, all the careful analysis she'd done. If Kale was telling the truth, she'd been an unwitting participant in planning a massacre. What do you need from me? She asked. Help me access the ship's communication system. I need to warn the colony, give them time to evacuate before the military arrives. Elena looked at James again, this time seeing him with new eyes. Had she been naive? Had she trusted too easily? The James she knew was kind, dedicated to science, passionate about discovery. But people could hide their true purposes, especially if they were trained to do so. If I help you, she said carefully, and you're lying to me, I'll be committing treason. If you don't help me, Kyle replied, innocent families will die, children who've never hurt anyone, people whose only crime was falling in love across species lines. The biobed's proximity sensors chimed softly, reminding Elena how close they were lying. She should move away, put some distance between them, think clearly about this impossible situation. Instead, she found herself studying Kale's face, looking for signs of deception. What she saw was exhaustion, pain, and something else, a desperate hope that she might choose to trust him. His hand was resting near hers on the narrow bed, and she noticed his fingers were long and elegant, with calluses that spoke of weapon training, but also gentleness in how he moved. The heating system is failing, she said suddenly, noticing the temperature readings dropping again. Kale nodded weakly. It's been struggling since the attack damaged the ship's power grid. Elena made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of moving away, she settled more comfortably against his side, pulling the blankets up around both of them. Body heat works better anyway, she said practically, and we need to keep you alive if you're going to help save those families. As they lay there in the dim light, sharing warmth and secrets, Elena realized that everything she'd believed about, her mission, her purpose, maybe even her life, was about to change. Outside their small sanctuary, the universe continued its ancient dance, but inside the biobed, two very different people were discovering that trust could grow in the most unlikely circumstances. The ship's automated systems chimed midnight, marking the beginning of their fourth day together. Elena felt Kale's breathing deepen as he finally found peaceful sleep, and she allowed herself to relax for the first time since the attack. Tomorrow, she would have to decide whether to believe his story. Tonight, she would simply keep him alive and try to figure out how her orderly scientific life had become something out of a space adventure novel. Elena woke to the sound of metal boots echoing through the ship's corridors. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming, but then she heard voices, human voices, getting closer to their sealed section. Rescue, James said, sitting up quickly on his makeshift bed. Finally, but Kale was already moving despite his weakened condition. That's not rescue, he said grimly, struggling to sit up on the biobed. That's a military sweep team. Elena felt her stomach drop. How can you tell? The boot pattern, the way they're moving through the ship. They're not looking for survivors, they're looking for threats to eliminate. Before Elena could ask more questions, a powerful cutting torch began working on the sealed door to their medical bay. Sparks flew as the military team burned through the emergency barriers that had kept them alive for the past 4 days. Dr. Vasquez, step away from the alien, a voice commanded through the door. We're here to extract you safely. Elena looked at Kyle, who had gone very still. His pale blue eyes met hers, and she saw something that made her heart race. Not fear, for himself, but fear for her. Elena, he said quietly. Whatever happens, don't let them take the research data. There are innocent people counting on that information staying out of the wrong hands. The door burst open in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Armed soldiers in full combat gear poured into the medical bay, their weapons trained on Kale. Leading them was a tall man with silver hair and cold gray eyes. Dr. Vasquez, I'm Commander Nash. We're here to bring you home. His voice was calm, almost friendly, but Elena noticed his soldiers kept their weapons ready. Step away from the hostile alien. He's not hostile, Elena said, moving protectively. In front of Kale. He's injured, and his name is Kale. Commander Nash's expression didn't change. Dr. Vasquez, you've been through a traumatic experience. It's common for hostages to develop sympathetic feelings toward their captors. We call it Stockholm Syndrome. I wasn't a hostage, Elena protested. He saved our lives. The ship was losing atmosphere, and he helped us survive. Is that what he told you? Nash asked, pulling out a data tablet. Let me share some facts. This individual is a known terrorist, responsible for attacks on 3 human colonies. His species calls themselves Zephyrians, and they've been planning a war against humanity for years. Elena felt the world spinning around her. That's not true. Nash swiped his tablet, showing her images of destroyed buildings and casualty reports. These are the results of Zephyrian attacks. They use infiltrators like this one to gather intelligence before striking. Dr. Vasquez, this creature has been using you. Elena looked back at Kale, searching his face for answers. He met her eyes steadily. Ask him about the research data, Kale said simply. Ask Commander Nash what Project Harmony really is. Nash's friendly expression flickered for just a moment. The alien is trying to manipulate you, Doctor. Don't listen to his lies. Then explain Project Harmony to me, Elena said, her scientific mind demanding facts. Explain why you need my genetic analysis of alien tissue samples. That's classified information, Nash replied. But I can tell you that your work is vital to protecting humanity from hostile alien species. Protecting or attacking? Elena asked, remembering everything Kale had told her over the past few days. Nash's patience seemed to run out. Sergeant Williams, restrain the alien. Dr. Chen, Dr. Vasquez, you're coming with us for debriefing. As the soldiers moved toward Kyle, Elena saw James stand up from his makeshift bed, but instead of looking relieved at their rescue, he looked worried. Very worried. Commander, James said carefully, what are your orders regarding Dr. Vasquez's memory of these events? Elena's blood went cold. What does that mean? Nash glanced at James with approval. Standard protocol for contaminated personnel. Memory modification to remove traumatic experiences and any classified information the alien might have shared. Memory modification? Elena backed away from both Nash and James. You're talking about brainwashing. It's for your own good, Nash said, and for national security. Dr. Chen has already briefed us on the alien's attempts to feed you false information about Project Harmony. Elena stared at James, her research partner, her friend, someone she'd trusted completely. You've been reporting on me this whole time? James had the grace to look ashamed. Elena, my job was to protect you, to make sure your research stayed focused on legitimate scientific goals. What are the legitimate goals, James? What is Project Harmony really for? Before James could answer, Kale spoke from the biobed. Show her the colony files, Commander. Show her what you're planning to do to the families living on Research Station Omega-7. Nash spun toward Kale, his friendly mask finally dropping completely. Shut up. Families with children, Kale continued, his voice getting stronger despite his injuries. Human mothers and Zephyrian fathers. Zephyrian mothers and human fathers. People who fell in love across species lines and built a life together. Elena felt pieces clicking together in her mind. The genetic markers I've been analyzing, you're not building communication tools. You're building weapons that target specific genetic sequences. Dr. Vasquez, you will stop this line of questioning. Immediately, Nash ordered, but Elena was beyond stopping. Her scientific training demanded answers, and her growing feelings for Kale demanded the truth. How many people live on that research station? 237, Kale answered, including 43 children under the age of 10. Nash raised his weapon toward Kale. That's enough. Elena watched in horror as Nash's finger moved toward the trigger. Without thinking, she threw herself between the gun and Kale, her arms spread wide. No, she said firmly. I won't let you execute a wounded prisoner. Dr. Vasquez, move aside. That's an order. Elena looked around the medical bay, at the soldiers with their weapons, at James who couldn't meet her eyes, at Commander Nash who was clearly prepared to shoot through her to reach Kale. Then she looked at the emergency controls for the medical base systems. Elena, don't, Kale warned, seeing where her gaze had gone. But Elena had made her choice. She lunged for the emergency panel and hit the atmospheric purge button. Immediately, alarms began blaring as the medical bay's atmosphere started venting into space. The soldiers stumbled as the sudden change in pressure threw them off balance. 30 seconds until full atmosphere loss, the computer announced calmly. In the chaos that followed, Cal somehow found the strength to move, despite his injuries, his training as whatever kind of warrior he'd been kicked in. Elena watched in amazement as he disarmed 2 soldiers and cleared a path toward the emergency supplies locker. The escape pods, he shouted over the alarms, grabbing breathing masks and throwing one to Elena. Elena strapped on her mask and followed Kyle as he led her through corridors now filled with emergency lights and rushing air. Behind them, she could hear Nash shouting orders and the sounds of soldiers giving chase. This way, Kale said, pulling her toward the ship's escape pod bay. As they ran, Elena's mind processed everything that had happened. She'd just committed treason. She'd attacked military personnel and was fleeing with someone her own government considered a terrorist. She'd thrown away her career, her life, everything she'd worked for. But she'd also potentially saved the lives of 237 innocent people, including 43 children who'd never hurt anyone. They reached the escape pods just as the first soldier rounded the corner behind them. Elena dove into Pod 7 while Kale hit the launch sequence. As the pod's door sealed and they were ejected into space, Elena caught a glimpse of Nash's face through a window. He looked furious, but not surprised, as if he'd always expected this outcome. The escape pod's tiny space meant Elena and Kale were pressed together again, just like they'd been on the biobed. But this time they were both fully awake and aware of what had just happened. I'm sorry, Kyle said quietly as the pod's autopilot engaged and began searching for the nearest habitable planet. I never wanted to drag you into this. Elena looked out the pod's small window at the research ship growing smaller behind them. Somewhere on that ship were years of her work, her personal belongings, her old life. She was now a fugitive from her own species, with nowhere to go and no way back. Are they really planning to attack the colony? She asked. Yes. The military strike is scheduled for next week. Elena closed her eyes and leaned back against the pod's padding. When she opened them again, Kale was watching her with those unusual pale blue eyes. Then we have to warn them, she said simply. Kale stared at her. Elena, you understand what you've done? You can never go home. Your government will consider you a traitor. You'll be hunted for the rest of your life. Elena thought about Nash's cold eyes, about James's betrayal, about her research being turned into a weapon of genocide. Then she thought about 43 children who deserved a chance to grow up. Some things are more important than going home, she said. As their escape pod drifted toward an unknown planet and an uncertain future, Elena realized that for the first time in her life, she'd chosen passion over safety, truth over comfort. It terrified her, but it also felt more right than anything she'd ever done. The pod's navigation system chimed softly, indicating they would reach the nearest planet in 6 hours. 6 hours alone with Kale, pressed together in a space even smaller than the escape pod shook violently as it entered the atmosphere of Kepler 442b. Elena gripped the safety straps, her knuckles white as she watched the heat shields glow red through the small window. Beside her, Kale was unconscious again, his condition worsening despite her efforts to keep him stable during their 6-hour journey. Come on, she whispered, checking his pulse for the 100th time. It was weak and irregular. Whatever injuries he'd suffered during their escape from the research ship were taking their toll. The pod's computer announced their imminent landing with typical mechanical calm. Warning: landing zone shows extreme temperature variations. Daytime surface temperature, 47 degrees Celsius. Nighttime surface temperature, minus 23 degrees Celsius. Survival gear recommended. Elena laughed bitterly. Survival gear. They had the clothes on their backs, basic medical supplies from the pod's emergency kit, and maybe 8 hours before the planet's brutal cold cycle began. Oh, and they were being hunted by both human and alien military forces who wanted them dead or captured. The pod hit the ground hard, throwing Elena against the restraints. When the motion finally stopped, she could hear the hiss of cooling metal and the whistle of alien wind outside. She activated the external sensors and breathed a small sigh of relief. The atmosphere was breathable, though thin, and the immediate area seemed free of dangerous wildlife. "Kyle," she said, gently shaking his shoulder. "We need to move. We can't stay in the pod." His eyes opened slowly, those pale blue irises unfocused with pain and exhaustion. "Where are we?" "Kepler 442b. It's a frontier world, barely mapped. The temperature drops to dangerous levels when the sun goes down, so we need to find shelter." Kyle struggled to sit up, wincing as movement aggravated his injuries. "How long until nightfall?" Elena checked the pod's chronometer against the local star's position. "Maybe 4 hours. Can you walk?" "I'll have to." They gathered what supplies they could carry: water purification tablets, emergency rations, basic medical kit, and a portable scanner that might help them find shelter. Elena helped Kale out of the pod and immediately felt the alien sun beating down on them. The landscape was rocky and barren, with strange crystalline formations jutting from the red-orange soil. There, Kyle pointed to a structure about a kilometer away. It was clearly artificial, though partly collapsed. "Looks like an old research station." The walk took them nearly 2 hours. Kale leaned heavily on Elena. His breathing labored as they picked their way across the uneven terrain. Twice he had to stop completely, his body shaking with exhaustion and pain. Elena found herself studying his profile as he rested, noticing the way the alien sunlight brought out silver highlights in his dark hair. "Tell me about your parents," she said during one of their rest stops. "You mentioned your mother was human." Kyle was quiet for so long that Elena thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke softly. "Her name was Dr. Lisa Crawford. She was a xenobiologist, like you. She was part of the first peaceful contact mission with the Zephyrians 28 years ago." "What happened to her?" "She fell in love with my father. His name was Zeth, and he was a translator for his people. They tried to make it work, tried to build a bridge between our species through their relationship." Kyle's voice grew heavy. "Both governments disapproved. They were ordered to separate, to forget each other. Instead, they ran away together." Elena felt her heart ache for the young couple who'd defied 2 worlds for love. "They found the colony? Research Station Omega-7? They helped create it. It started as just a few families, people from both species who believed we could coexist peacefully. My parents lived there for 5 years. I was born there." Kale's eyes grew distant. "It was perfect. Children playing together regardless of what species their parents were. Scientists from both cultures sharing knowledge. Artists creating new forms of beauty by blending human and Zephyrian traditions. What changed? Politics. Fear. Both governments decided that mixed families were a threat to species purity. They started pressuring the colony, cutting off supplies, spreading propaganda about the dangers of interbreeding." Kyle's voice turned bitter. "My parents were killed during a routine inspection when I was 12. The official report said it was an accident, but everyone knew better." Elena stopped walking and turned to face him. "Kale, I'm sorry, I had no idea. I was taken by Zephyrian military forces and trained as a warrior. They told me that humans were the enemy, that my mother's people had corrupted my father and caused his death. I believed them for years." He met her eyes. Until I learned the truth about Project Harmony. Until I realized that both our governments are willing to commit genocide, rather than accept that love can exist between different species. They reached the abandoned research station as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The structure was partially intact, with one section still sealed and pressurized. Elena's scanner detected a functioning thermal regulation system, not as advanced as the biobed from the ship, but enough to keep them alive through the night. Inside, they found evidence of the station's former inhabitants, research notes in multiple languages, family photos showing humans and Zephyrians together, children's drawings stuck to walls. It had been a place of hope and discovery, abandoned when political tensions made it impossible to maintain. "Look, at this," Elena called, finding a functioning communications array. "It's old, but it might still work." Kale joined her at the console, his technical knowledge helping her understand the alien components mixed with human technology. As they worked together to restore power to the system, Elena became acutely aware of how close they were standing. Every time their hands touched while reaching for controls, she felt a jolt of something that had nothing to do with static electricity. "There," Kyle said as the communications array hummed to life. "We can reach the colony from here." But Elena hesitated before activating the transmission. "What happens after we warn them? Where do we go? What do we do?" Kyle looked around the abandoned station at the photos of mixed families who'd once lived in hope and peace. "I don't know. We can't go back to either of our peoples. We're fugitives, now outcasts from both worlds." The temperature outside was already dropping as the sun touched the horizon. Elena activated the thermal regulation system, which began warming the small space they'd claimed as shelter. Like on the ship, the system was designed for one person, creating a cozy area just large enough for two people to share. "Elena," Kale said quietly, "you didn't have to do this. You could have stayed with your people, had your memory modified, gone back to your research. You had a life." Elena thought about her old life, the sterile laboratories, the academic conferences, the careful distance she'd maintained from anything too messy or emotional. Then she looked at Kale, at this man who'd risked everything to save innocent families, who'd shown her that the universe was both more dangerous and more beautiful than she'd ever imagined. "That wasn't living," she said simply. "That was just existing." As the alien night fell and the temperature plummeted, they huddled together in the thermal regulation field. Elena found herself telling Kale about her own past, how she'd always felt like an observer of life rather than a participant, how her work had been her whole world until she met him. "I've never been in love," she admitted in the darkness. "I told myself I was too busy, too focused on my career. But the truth is, I was scared. Love means risking everything, and I've always chosen safety over risk." Kale's arm tightened around her. "And now?" Elena thought about everything they'd been through together, about the way her heart raced when he looked at her, about how natural it felt to lie beside him despite their different worlds. "Now I'm learning that some risks are worth taking," she whispered. In the warm darkness of their shared shelter, surrounded by evidence of other couples who'd chosen love over fear, Elena realized that whatever happened next, she was no longer the same person who'd been studying alien samples in a sterile laboratory just a week ago. She was someone who could choose passion over safety, someone who could fight for what was right even when it cost everything. The communications array chimed softly, indicating an incoming transmission. Elena and Kale looked at each other in the dim light, both knowing that their quiet moment was over. Tomorrow they would contact the colony and warn them about the impending attack. Tomorrow they would have to figure out how two fugitives from different worlds could make a difference in preventing a war. But tonight, for just a few more hours, they could hold each other close and pretend that love was enough to solve all the universe's problems. Outside their shelter, the alien wind howled across the barren landscape, but inside, two hearts that had never expected to find each other were learning what it meant to truly connect across the vast loneliness of space. Elena woke to the sound of ships approaching. Through the research station's cracked windows, she could see lights moving across the dawn sky. Too many lights, coming from multiple directions. Her heart sank as she realized that both human and Zephyrian forces had found them. "Kale," she whispered, gently shaking him awake. "We have company." He was alert instantly, his warrior training kicking in despite his injuries. Together they peered out at the approaching ships. Elena counted at least 6 vessels, 3 with the sleek design of human military craft, 3 with the organic curves of Zephyrian technology. "They're working together," Kale said grimly. "Both our governments have decided we're too dangerous to live." Elena's mind raced. Over the past week, she'd managed to decode most of her own research data and combine it with information from the station's old files. The result was a breakthrough that could change everything, a complete genetic map showing how human and Zephyrian DNA could not only coexist, but actually enhance each other when combined. It proved that mixed families weren't abominations to be eliminated, but the next step in both species' evolution. "The data," she said, moving to the communications array. "If I can broadcast this information to both governments simultaneously, show them the truth about genetic compatibility." "They'll never listen," Kale said, but he was already helping her power up the transmission equipment. "Fear is stronger than facts." "Maybe, but we have to try." The first explosions shook the station as warning shots landed nearby. Elena's fingers flew over the controls, uploading her research data to every available communication channel. The genetic maps, the proof of successful human Zephyrian reproduction, the evidence that mixed families produce children who were stronger and more adaptable than either pure species. "Attention fugitives," Commander Nash's voice boomed from external speakers. "You have 60 seconds to surrender before we level that structure." Elena looked at Kale, seeing her own determination reflected in his pale blue eyes. "Whatever happens, I want you to know that this week has been the most alive I've ever felt." Kale cupped her face in his hands. "Elena, in my culture, we have a saying, 'The heart that burns brightest burns together.' I never understood it until I met you." Before Elena could respond, the station's proximity alarms began screaming. But these weren't warning of attack, they were announcing new arrivals. Through the windows, Elena saw more ships dropping out of hyperspace, but these were different. Smaller, civilian vessels with mixed human and Zephyrian design elements. "The colony," Kyle breathed. "They came." Elena's heart leaped as she recognized the lead ship's configuration. It matched the designs she'd seen in the station's old files, vessels built by the mixed families of Research Station Omega-7. They had received her warning and come to help. The civilian ships took defensive positions around the research station, their weapons powering up. Elena could see the confusion in the military formations as they tried to decide how to respond to this unexpected development. "This is Captain Torres of the Free Colony ship Unity." A woman's voice came over the communications channel. Elena heard both human determination and Zephyrian harmonics in her speech, another hybrid like Kale. "Stand down your weapons. We're here to protect the people who risked everything to save our families." Commander Nash's response was immediate. "Colonial vessel, you are harboring known terrorists. Withdraw or face the consequences." "Commander," Captain Torres replied calmly, "I suggest you review the data being broadcast from the surface. Dr. Elena Vasquez has made a discovery that changes everything we thought we knew about human Zephyrian genetics." Elena held her breath as she watched the military ships. Would they listen? Would they even look at her research? The answer came in the form of weapons fire. Nash's ships opened fire on the colony vessels, apparently deciding that facts were less important than following orders. But the colonial ships were ready, their shields absorbing the initial assault while they returned fire with surprising effectiveness. In the chaos of the space battle above, Elena noticed movement on the ground. Soldiers from both species were advancing on the research station, apparently planning to capture her and Kale while their ships dealt with the colonists. "The thermal regulation system," Elena said suddenly. "If I can overload it, create a heat burst that knocks out their equipment, that could kill us too," Kyle warned. Elena looked up at the battle raging in the sky, where people were dying to protect them, to protect the data that could prevent a genocide. Some things are worth the risk. They worked together, Elena's scientific knowledge combining with Kyl's technical skills to reprogram the station's systems. As soldiers surrounded the building, Elena initiated the overload sequence. The thermal regulation system screamed as energy levels spiked far beyond safe parameters. Heat poured into the station's atmosphere, creating a protective bubble of superheated air that would disable any equipment that got too close. But instead of killing them, the heat seemed to energize Kyle. Elena watched in amazement as his injuries began healing at an accelerated rate, his Zephyrian physiology thriving in the extreme temperature. "How?" she gasped. "My people evolved on a world with extreme heat," Kyle explained, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "We're powered by thermal energy. I've been operating at half capacity this whole time." Now fully recovered, Kyle became the warrior he'd been trained to be. When the soldiers finally breached the station's defenses, they found themselves facing someone who moved like liquid mercury and fought with deadly precision. But Elena noticed that he was careful not to kill, only to disable and disarm. The battle might have gone differently if not for what happened next. Elena's broadcast had reached more than just the military commanders. It had gone out on open channels, spreading across both human and Zephyrian civilian networks. Scientists, doctors, families with mixed heritage, they were all seeing the proof that love between species wasn't just possible, it was beneficial. Elena watched through the station's communications array as protests erupted on dozens of worlds. Human mothers with Zephyrian partners, Zephyrian fathers with human children, mixed families who had been hiding their relationships. They were all coming forward, demanding an end to the persecution. Even some of the soldiers surrounding the research station began lowering their weapons as they received personal messages from home. Elena heard one human sergeant talking to his squad. "My sister married a Zephyrian last year. They've been hiding it from everyone, but look at this data. Their kids will be healthier than either of our species alone." The turning point came when one of the Zephyrian military commanders, a stern-faced woman named General Vex, received a priority message on her personal communicator. Elena couldn't hear the words, but she saw the general's expression change from determination to shock, to something that looked like hope. "Cease fire," General Vex ordered her ships. "All units, cease fire immediately." Commander Nash's voice crackled with anger. "General, we have our orders. These fugitives are dangerous to both our species." "Commander," General Vex replied, "I just received word that my own daughter has been living in the colonial settlement for 3 years. She married a human engineer and has been afraid to tell me because of policies like Project Harmony. I will not fire on ships protecting my grandchildren." The space battle stopped as abruptly as it had begun. Elena watched through the station's sensors as the military ships powered down their weapons. On the ground, soldiers from both species were standing down, many of them looking confused but relieved. Captain Torres's voice came over the communications channel again. "Dr. Vasquez Kale, this is your invitation to come home. Not to the worlds you left behind, but to a new home where people like us can live without fear." Elena looked at Kyle, seeing the wonder in his eyes. "A real home," she said softly. "Together," he replied. As they prepared to leave the research station that had sheltered them through their darkest hour, Elena realized that her old dream of building bridges between species had come true in ways she'd never imagined. She'd found not just scientific breakthrough, but love that transcended the artificial boundaries between worlds. The colonial ships landed near the research station, their crews eager to welcome the two people who had risked everything to save their families. Elena saw humans and Zephyrians working side by side, children who were beautiful blends of both species, couples who had chosen love over fear. As she and Kale walked toward their new life together, Elena thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. A week ago, she'd been a lonely scientist studying alien samples in a sterile laboratory. Now she was part of something bigger, a movement toward understanding, acceptance, and love that could literally reshape the galaxy. "No more confined spaces," Kyle said. taking her hand as they approached the ship that would carry them to their new home. Elena smiled, thinking of all the nights they'd spent pressed together for survival, sharing body heat and secrets and slowly falling in love. "I don't know," she said teasingly. "Sometimes being confined with the right person is exactly where you want to be." Above them, the ships of both military forces were forming up in escort formation, no longer enemies, but protectors of something precious and new. Elena's research had done more than